Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving right into the hidden mechanics of nonverbal communication. We're going to reveal how your unspoken actions, down to those fraction of a second micro-expressions on your face, can literally make or break your professional success. Have you ever noticed how some people can just walk in and command a room without uttering a single syllable? Well, we are unpacking the data, the science, and the global rules behind that exact phenomenon.
So let's kick things off with what seems like a totally basic question. When you're speaking English in a business meeting, how much of your actual message is carried by the words you use? Think about it for a second. We spend so much time obsessing over our vocabulary, our grammar, the exact phrasing of our emails and our pitches, but humans are incredibly visually driven creatures. We actually rely heavily on what we see to decode the world around us. So how much weight do those words really carry?
Enter Dr. Albert Mehrabian's famous 738-55 rule. This rule tells us that a staggering 55% of our communication is entirely based on our body language. Another 38% comes down to the tone and the speed of our voice. That leaves a measly 7% for the actual spoken words. Essentially, if your words are saying, "I am totally confident in this deal," but your arms are tightly crossed and you're avoiding eye contact, your audience is inherently going to believe your body, not your words.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The unspoken English language. 2. The power posing myth. 3. The science of personal space. 4. The art of mirroring. And 5. Global body language mistakes.
All right, part 1. The unspoken English language, mastering the basics.
Let's start with the absolute foundational elements of the unspoken English language. These are the micro-behaviors that can either establish immediate trust or put up an instant wall between you and your colleagues. Toastmasters International actually points out that intentional movements actively reinforce your sincerity. Let's look at purposeful eye contact. We aren't talking about an awkward, unblinking stare. We're talking about focusing in on individual listeners to create a real bond. You also have to get a handle on those nervous mannerisms, like shoving your hands in your pockets or overusing filler words, because those quietly drain your authority. And physically acting out your verbs, moving dynamically, it is incredibly effective. Stepping toward an audience makes a critical connection in person. And if you're in a virtual meeting, leaning into that webcam while keeping your hands naturally visible in the frame shows that your words and your actions are in perfect alignment.
Moving right along to Section 2, the power posing myth, science versus fiction.
Okay, it is time to look at a widely accepted truth about body language and see what the data actually has to say. We have all heard the advice, right? Stand like a superhero before a big interview. Back in 2012, a massively famous TED Talk promised us that expansive power posing for just 2 minutes would manipulate our hormones, raising testosterone, lowering stress, and dramatically increase our self-confidence. Fake it till you become it. But reality tells a very different story. Researchers at All Hearts BSS conducted a huge meta-analysis of 73 independent studies looking at over 7,000 participants. And you know what they found? Absolutely no measurable difference between a neutral posture and a power pose. The fatal flaw of those original studies was that they completely lack neutral control groups. I mean, you simply cannot prove a superhero pose works if you're only comparing it to someone sitting slumped over like a wet noodle.
So, simply put, you do not need to strike a dramatic superhero pose in the bathroom stall before your next job interview. As researcher Emma Elker-Polson notes, not hunching is just as effective. The science shows that merely avoiding a closed, hunched, or slumped posture is exactly what matters most. A neutral, relaxed stance is literally all you need to project authentic confidence.
Section 3. The science of personal space, proxemics at work.
Now that we've fixed our individual posture by ditching that power posing myth, let's explore how we physically relate to others in the workplace. It's time to talk about personal space. This brings us to proxemics. Coined by Edward T. Hall back in the 1960s, proxemics is the study of how people use personal space and the distances they'll tolerate before they start feeling uncomfortable. It perfectly explains why we get suddenly stressed out when a coworker hovers just a little too close to our desk in an open-plan office. When those spatial boundaries are crossed, our brain registers it as a distraction or even a threat, which leads straight to sensory overload and burnout.
Edward T. Hall mapped out 4 distinct zones that really build our understanding of workplace dynamics. The intimate zone is up to 18 inches. Usually, that's reserved for close family. At work, this is extremely rare, maybe comforting a highly distressed close colleague, but that's about it. Next is the personal zone, from 18 to 48 inches. This is where you'd have an informal chat with a work friend in the break room. The social zone stretches from 48 inches out to 12 feet. That's your standard work-related conversation and team discussion area. And finally, the public zone is anything beyond 12 feet. Think a manager giving a formal presentation in a conference room. Respecting these 4 distinct zones actively reduces conflict and protects your colleagues' focus. If you step into someone's personal zone just to ask a simple social question, boom, you instantly make them defensive.
On to Section 4, the art of mirroring, building sales rapport. So, how do we actively harness all this body language stuff to build deep subconscious rapport? Well, this is an incredibly powerful tool, especially in sales environments and client negotiations. According to research from Stanford and Northwestern universities, using the mirroring technique can drastically increase a deal's success rate from a measly 12.5% up to a massive 67%. Why? Social science shows us that people inherently like people who are similar to them. Mirroring is basically a psychological shortcut to familiarity. It is quite literally the difference between making a connection and losing a lead. So, how do we actually pull this off? There are 3 main steps to effective mirroring. First, match their posture. If they sit with their legs crossed, subtly cross yours. Second, match their energy and tone. If they're speaking at a serious, measured pace, don't overwhelm them with loud, overly enthusiastic chatter. Meet them exactly where they are. And third, echo their phrasing. Gently reuse their specific words to prove you are actively listening. But listen, here is the catch. It must be done with extreme subtlety. The client should feel a natural kinship. They shouldn't feel like they're being mocked or awkwardly mimicked. But hey, major red flag here. Never, ever mirror negative emotions. Sometimes a client will come into a meeting stressed, frustrated, or angry, probably because of internal pressures that have absolutely nothing to do with you. If you mirror that frustration, the meeting will collapse into toxicity. Instead, you want to empathize verbally with their situation, but maintain a confident, positive physical tone. You have to be the anchor that guides the interaction back on track.
And finally, Section 5, Global Body Language Mistakes, Crossing Borders.
We've talked about the English language basics and proxemics, but what happens when you take those rules on an international business trip? The reality is, what projects confidence in the US, the UK, or Australia can completely tank a business relationship elsewhere. The rules change entirely once you cross international borders. First, that bone-crushing, firm handshake we're all taught in the West. In parts of Asia and Europe, it's seen as dominating and overpowering. Soften it up. Second, direct eye contact. Westerners view it as trustworthy, sure, but in Asia, unwavering eye contact can be viewed as highly aggressive. Third, never point with your index finger. Use an open palm with your fingers grouped together instead. Fourth, be very careful how you cross your legs. Showing the bottom of your foot is highly offensive in many cultures as it's considered the lowest part of the body. And finally, proxemics. If you stand at a Western arm's length in Latin America or Asia, you're actually standing too far away, and they might feel you're being cold and disconnected. You have to adapt your physical presence to their cultural baseline.
Well, there you have it. We've covered the 738-55 rule, busted the power posing myth, explored proxemic zones, and mastered the subtle art of mirroring and global etiquette. As you leave this explainer and head into your next meeting, whether it's an in-person pitch or a virtual online call, I want you to remember that you are always communicating, even when your mouth is completely shut. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Take a moment, sit back, and ask yourself, what is your body saying right now, and who is listening?